The Compliance Perspectives podcast is sponsored by Athena, customizable compliance training, an employee hotline, and case management all in one tool. Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turteltaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today from Houston is Justin Ross. Justin is Vice President, Chief Compliance Officer at Cisco. And then joining us from Bedford, Massachusetts is Carrie Penman, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Navex. And today we're going to be talking about their session at the 2025 Compliance and Ethics Institute. Numbers that matter, moving beyond hotline data to identify and build an ethical workplace. Carrie, Justin, thanks so much for talking with us today and for speaking at the conference. Carrie, why don't we start with you and talk about hotline data, which obviously for you at Navex Global certainly knows better than most. How has hotline data traditionally been used by organizations?
That's a great question. And I think it varies depending on the size of the organization, the industry that they're in, the engagement of their board is often a factor on how they use it. So I would say, we see organizations using the data so differently. But one thing I do know, it is sitting in a lot of boardrooms. And so the question always is, how is that information being presented to those audiences? Because there are certainly different audiences that are involved in using data. For example, we, the CCOs, use it. The executive team and the CEO should be aware of it. Boards of directors are often part of it, but employees as well. Many organizations provide information to employees on how the hotline data looks for their organization. So those are just my thoughts on how it's been used.
Well, and you started talking about all the different uses, and it leads to a question, that the two of you both believe that it's not being necessarily used enough. Justin, how else could the data be used?
Well, Adam, let me actually go back to your first question, and
Sure.
I'll speak from experience on how data has traditionally been used and speak from my experience. So I've been in the compliance, industry for 20 years. And when we first started reporting on or looking at hotline data, it was super reactionary, totally like looking back. How many cases did you get? What were the substantiation rates? Did they come in via phone or via web? Really just kind of, I call it static data. And we did it just for board reporting, and we'd give that static data to the board. And like I said, very reactionary, not necessarily proactive. But as we've evolved in the compliance programs that I've been involved in, and I think the industry has evolved with the use of hotline data, I think we've all gotten better at using the data to be more proactive and looking at different, data elements related to hotline data. So really using it to identify hotspots or problems that may occur in the future. So looking at things like locations, drilling down, all the way to site level or region or market level to see if you can get insights. Really breaking down the categories. Is it a fraud case? Is it a sexual harassment case? Is it a bribery case? And if it is, where is that occurring? And then what employees are being involved? What management is being involved? Do you have opportunities for training or communication or awareness based on that data? Do you have more morale or culture issues that are being highlighted by the data? So I really think that it's evolved. And Carrie's right. It depends on the organization. But I think as an industry, we've gotten a lot better in using the data to be more proactive rather than just reporting it on a spreadsheet or on a slide to our board.
So as we use this data more comprehensively and in new ways, what patterns should compliance teams be looking for?
The good thing about hotline data now is I think it's a treasure trove of data for an organization, not just for the compliance team, but for all levels of the organization, to really get an idea of what's going on in the organization from a culture standpoint, from a morale standpoint, all of that. So I think you can look at geographical data. And like I said earlier, You can drill down to country, market, region, site, to the team level, even to the function level. What functions are your cases coming from? You can look at drill down into people. Are you having repeat offenders? Do you have high anonymity rates? What does that mean? We talked about categories earlier. What are you seeing from a category perspective? Is it bribery? Is it fraud? Is it sexual harassment? Then you can even get, and I guess this is these are, I guess, the fuzzier categories like thematic and cultural issues. Are you seeing a lot of retaliation, organizational justice issues, speak up issues? We've even looked at, and I've really focused on this with our teams more lately, is what are the outcomes? How many terminations are we seeing as a result of ethics line reports? I think that's very good. Is it less than terminations? Are you seeing disciplinary action, coaching, things like that? And then, substantiation rates are always important. I think Carrie's team at Navex does a really good job of explaining what substantiation rates mean, and how higher substantiation rates typically mean you're getting a better level or higher level reports that mean something, and something that companies can actually deal with and do something with.
And Justin, I might add just a couple of things to your really great list. I want to touch on reports of retaliation. I think that's something that we ought to be talking about separately and independently, just because of the impact that may have on people's willingness to make a report. I also would actually add to patterns of employee versus non-employee reporters could be something that you start to see patterns. Absolutely, totally agree with you on the disciplinary action, the level of employees' discipline. That's something important to look at. We've also been looking at data related to the number of days between when the incident occurs and when the employee or reporter decides to speak up about it. And if you are seeing long time frames in between when the incident occurred and when it's reported, there could be some fear factors to be watching out for there as well. So, that is the key, I think, to be looking for patterns that you might be finding. And really, I think almost everything needs to come down to a location or a geography to be helpful, as you said.
And Carrie, one more thing on that. And I think you and I have talked about this in some of the previous presentations we've done, but I see the hotline data as potentially the canary in the coal mine. Sometimes it really can uncover, even if it's just innocuous cases. If you're seeing workplace civility type cases in a site or a region, which typically individually would not raise much concern, but let's say you see a bunch of them in a site, a lot of times that can be, like I said, the canary in the coal mine for other issues, more important, more significant issues happening at that site with management, things like that. So it gives you an opportunity to send in the audit team, send in the compliance team to look under the covers to see if there's other issues. Because we've done that before. And where it started just with, I said, innocuous type cases, we've uncovered more significant cases when you see big trends at certain sites and locations and markets.
Yeah, I had that experience in my original company as well. And where we had those innocuous, my boss is mean to me reports, we almost always had financial issues. To your point, we sent in the audit team. And so, I think that's just a reminder of how important taking those calls seriously is.
Well, there's a lot that you two said there that I think people should take to heart. I mean, I just want to go back to something, Justin, I think you had said earlier, is we tend to talk a lot about sort of what the inputs are into the program, but one of the things not to lose track of is what are the outputs, what were the actions taken, and trying to understand what are we doing from everything from, are we responding to these things consistently? Are we good at some kinds of allegations and not so good at others? Are we seeing sort of patterns in terms of how we as an organization respond to these things, and are we doing an adequate enough job? And then secondly, to your coal mine and the sort of smaller issues being sites of broader things, I think about something a prosecutor told me years ago, that when she was investigating a fraud case or a suspected case of fraud, one of the first things she did was ask for the expense reports, because if she saw lots of low-level cheating, it gave her a sense that there was probably something bigger going on at the organization. And
Nice.
yeah, I thought it was a great little bit of genius on her part. And then, as you talked about looking at these sort of small things and looking at what else is going on, it sort of gets into a bigger issue of sort of what data should be overlaid within the hotline data. I mean, the hotline data doesn't stand alone. It really reflects a lot of things going on in the organization, both good and bad. Justin, what's your sense of what else should be factored in?
Well, I'll say this is one of those do as I say, not as I do, because I don't know that that we are doing as good a job with this. I think some companies are a lot better than others, and we are evolving on the maturity scale here. But look, all kinds of other data. HR data obviously is the one at the top of the list. Turnover data, attrition data at a site level, at a market level, at a company level, I think is important to look at. Exit interview data, culture survey data, the tenure of employees. I think that's a sort of an underlooked data point that I've seen. This is very interesting. We've had some big investigations at certain sites where the tenure of the employees played a factor, because the longer they're there, the more they know how to get around certain controls. And I hate to say that. It sounds pretty bad, but there were some consistencies in some big issues we had with tenure of employees, meaning the sites with the longer tenured employees tended to have more problems, which is a little bit counterintuitive. So we can unpack that here in a second. I'll go through a couple others. Audit findings, I think, are always good to overlay on hotline data to find out what's going on in a location. You've got some companies have other incident management systems like safety, kind of separate systems to the hotline, so you can use some of that. Training completion rates for some of your compliance training. I'll throw a bone to Carrie here. I think you got to benchmark. You absolutely have to benchmark. Anytime that we have any hotline data, I'm always benchmarking with other companies and with Carrie's annual benchmark report, because I think it's extremely important to see where you stand with other companies. And then one last one I have is, how's the company or how's the site or the region performing from a profit loss perspective or a sales perspective? Because a lot of times that can give you insight into other issues that a site may be having.
So Justin, that was a great list, and I think I had most of them, but I really want to emphasize, because one of the things I noted was businesses with less or more than expected financial performance, right? If something is really shifting one way or another that wasn't expected, that is definitely worth a look. I think other things I might have had were quality errors, along with, you mentioned safety and accident data. I think that's really important. IT incidents, litigation is another one I think that can be combined. I have this vision of pulling all of these things together. And it needs, back to what you originally said, Justin, at the location or geography level, to be able to say, we've got a culture issue at this location. One of the other ones that I might look at are the number of high-level leaders that have conflict of interest disclosures. If they're, a lot of COI disclosures that, aren't typical for a location. And combining that with, if you're doing review of suppliers that are used by that location or line of business, how many of them are high risk? How many would fall in the red or the yellow for your risk ranking of suppliers? All of those can kind of tell you about perhaps the risk appetite tolerance at a location or business that may be different from that of the overall business. So I think all of those are really important things to think about. And, the best advice I always have is sometimes you don't know it until you see it. And so you just have to look for these patterns, because when you see them, they jump off the page.
Yeah, and that on that performance data comment that you made, it's important not to just to look at the underperformers, but look at the overperformers, like you said. I mean, if you have a site that's an anomaly, and it's the only site out of 10 others that's like meeting its scores or meeting its goals, then sometimes, unfortunately, that's something that you need to look at. So if you're getting hotline data from there, the influx of reports, and you have that's an anomaly, whether it's up or down, I think you're right, Carrie. That could be a red flag.
There's one other thing that we can use data for, and that is for measuring our own effectiveness. And by that, I mean, we talked about disciplinary actions, but, days to close an investigation, or, is there a certain team of investigators that's more or less likely to substantiate cases? Are they fearful to say I have enough information to substantiate a case, and so they're calling it unsubstantiated, when others in the organization may say, no, that's sufficient information to be substantiated. And then consistency and discipline across the organization and the level of employees, that goes to the effectiveness of our programs, that we are taking appropriate action. And I know, Justin, you mentioned that one, but those are patterns that are also going to help us as compliance leaders, ensure that we're meeting a level of quality that is expected of us.
Well, Carrie, Justin, thank you so much for these insights today. I'm really looking forward to your session at the 2025 Compliance and Ethics Institute. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turteltaub from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.